Welcome to the meeting number 68 of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, study of sexual harassment in the federal workplace. We have witnesses today from the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal, Lieutenant Colonel Legere, Chief of Staff, Canadian Forces Military Police Group. Welcome to our committee. And Major Tim Langelo, Legal Officer, Office of the Judge Advocate General, Director of Law, Military Justice Operations. We're very pleased that you accepted our invitation to come and speak to the committee today. You each have 10 minutes for your remarks, and you'll be followed by questions from the committee. Thank you very much. Mr. Lieutenant Colonel Legere, would you like to begin?
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good morning. I'm here today with Major Tim Langlois, and he is the Office of the Judge, the legal officer for the Office of the Judge Advocate General at the Directorate of Law, Military Justice Operations. He is the legal advisor, and he's assigned to the CFMP group and reports to the Director, Law, Military Justice Operations Division of the Judge Advocate General. His mandate is to provide legal advice and guidance to the CFPM commander and his staff. I am the Chief of Staff for the Canadian Forces Military Police Group. I am responsible to the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal for the effective and efficient operation of the Canadian Forces Military Police Group headquarters and for all military and civilian staff assigned thereto. I am also the headquarters commanding officer.
Police, our organizational structure and role, mandate, and authorities within the Department of National Defence, the Canadian Armed Forces, and the military justice system. I will then endeavour to explain our role, or more specifically, our lack thereof, in the investigation of sexual harassment cases within the Canadian Armed Forces. I will cover the determination of whether an incident is handled administratively as sexual harassment or through disciplinary means in accordance with the Code of Service Discipline, and our role in that determination, and the military police role in the investigation of sexual misconduct. Finally, I know that you have also asked for information on how sexual harassment is addressed when there is a complaint from a member of the military police or against a member of the military police. I will address this as well. The Canadian Forces Military Police are the police force of jurisdiction for the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. We derive our authority from Section 156 of the National Defence Act. Military police are also recognized as peace officers in Section 2 of the Criminal Code of Canada when performing their policing functions and duties. Military police are members of the Canadian Armed Forces and receive common military skills training, like every other Canadian Forces member. We also receive the same kind of specialist police training as other police forces in Canada. As such, military police are fully trained and empowered to investigate crimes of a sexual nature. En bref, la police militaire comprend des professionnels.
In short, we are dual professionals. That is, we are members of both the profession of arms and the law enforcement profession. We are subject to the same administrative and disciplinary policies and procedures as every other member of the Canadian Armed Forces. Additionally, we are subject to the Military Police Code of Professional Conduct, both on and off duty. The Canadian Forces Provost Marshal is the Chief of Police for the military police, and he has two main roles.
Provost Marshal, he is responsible for all investigations conducted by military police, the establishment of selection and training standards applicable to candidates for the military police and ensuring compliance with those standards, the establishment of training and professional standards applicable to the military police and ensuring compliance with those standards, and investigations in respect of conduct that is inconsistent with the professional standards applicable to the military police or the Military Police Professional Code of Conduct. Secondly, as of 1 April 2011, he is also the commander of the Canadian Forces Military Police Group, and as such, he commands all military police members who conduct policing and duties and functions. This is an important and relatively recent development that enhances the independence of military police investigations and ensures that there is no real or perceived influence by the chain of command therein. As a formation commander, he is responsible for enforcing the Code of Service Discipline and all other Canadian Armed Forces orders, regulations, and policies and directives, including the Treasury Board policy and Defense Administrative Order and Directive on harassment. There are approximately 1,500 regular force military police personnel, both officers and non-commissioned members, within the Canadian Armed Forces, and approximately another 400 reserve force military police members, and they're stationed across Canada and around the world. I thought this committee might also be interested in the gender distribution of the military police. As of December 2012, 12.8% of military police non-commissioned members are female, which is on par with the 13.1% female population within the Canadian Armed Forces, non-commissioned members. For officers, 20% of military police officers are female, which is slightly higher than the 16.8% female population within the Canadian Armed Forces. The Canadian Forces Military Police Group has its headquarters here in Ottawa and has 7 sub-formations, which are the Naval Military Police Group, the Land Forces or Army Military Police Group, the Air Force Military Police Group, the Special Operations Forces Military Police Unit, the Military Police Services Group, the Canadian Forces Military Police Academy, and finally, the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service. And I will expand on their role specifically. The Canadian Forces National Investigation Service has the mandate to investigate serious and sensitive matters related to the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, similar to a major crimes unit in civilian police services. When the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service was established in 1997 with a mandate to investigate those matters related to the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, one of the particular areas that automatically came under their purview were sexual assaults. The military police investigate disciplinary and criminal offences, that is, offences found within the Code of Service Discipline, as well as those offences found in other statutes, such as the Criminal Code of Canada, pursuant to Section 130 of the National Defence Act. In doing so, it is our role to determine the facts of the case based upon the elements of the offence. L'harcèlement sexuel est traité
Sexual harassment is dealt with administratively in accordance with Canadian Armed Forces and Treasury Board policy. As such, it is up to the commanding officer of the unit to investigate the matter and take administrative action as deemed appropriate. These types of cases are very fact-dependent, and a careful analysis of these facts will help to determine whether a matter should be handled through administrative or disciplinary means. After the initial analysis, if doubt still exists, it is the commanding officer's responsibility to obtain legal and/or military police advice before taking any action.
The distinction is made between criminal or disciplinary matters and those behaviors that fall more appropriately in the administrative realm. Where behavior falls into the categories of service offenses contrary to the Code of Service Discipline, or crimes such as criminal harassment or sexual assault, the military police will investigate. Essentially, when it is alleged that behavior has gone behind gestures or comments, or that someone has been assaulted in circumstances of a sexual nature, then that is when the investigation will occur. As you heard from the Director General Military Personnel, sexual misconduct constitutes behavior that is sexual in nature and which constitutes an offence under the Criminal Code of Canada or the Code of Service Discipline. This behavior includes offences such as sexual assault, indecent exposure, voyeurism, and acts involving child pornography. Should these offences be alleged to have occurred, the military police would investigate. Les forces armées canadiennes et la police.
The Canadian Armed Forces and the military police take all allegations of sexual offences by Canadian Armed Forces personnel seriously. And in all cases, investigations are conducted to determine the facts, analyze the evidence, and if warranted, lay appropriate charges. I would also like to point out that the Military Police Group has a wide-ranging victim services program that puts the highest priority on support to victims and provides support and referrals to other services as required, including the Canadian Forces Health Services, Canadian Forces Member Assistance Program, and military chaplains, as well as a victim services program for families.
As you have heard from other representatives within the Department of National Defence, harassment is any improper conduct by an individual that is directed at and offensive to another person or persons in the workplace, and that the individual knew or ought reasonably to have known would cause offense or harm. It comprises any objectionable act, comment, or display that demeans, belittles, or causes personal humiliation or embarrassment in any act of intimidation or threat. There is no definition or policy specifically for sexual harassment. It is covered under the Treasury Board policy. The military police, like all other Canadian Armed Forces personnel, are subject to these regulations, orders, and policies. I will tell you categorically that harassment in any form, sexual or otherwise, is not tolerated within the Canadian Forces Military Police Group. This concludes my statement, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Legere. We'll now turn it over to Major Tim Langelo for 10 minutes.
Major Langlois does not have a statement.
Oh, he doesn't. He's there. Oh, that's even better. Gives us more opportunity for questions. So thank you both very much. We'll turn it over to Ms. Troupe for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming today. Your comments are very important to us, so we appreciate you taking the time. Within your well, maybe I should ask you first about the policy. The policy you have on workplace harassment, I think you said you follow the same standards as Treasury Board, if I'm not mistaken. So could you just sort of walk me through like who's responsible for the maintenance of a harassment-free workplace? Like, what's the series of events that goes on to make sure that senior members versus regular members are trained? You know, is there training that goes on? You know, like once a month, every 6 months, or just on arrival? Like, how does that go? How does that work in your field?
Thank you for the question. Really, the harassment policy for the Canadian Forces lies within the Director General of Military Careers and Chief of Military Personnel Command. So I really don't deal with the establishment of those policies or the establishment of training standards. What I can tell you is that harassment and the treatment of persons with dignity and respect is covered certainly in our basic training within the military police, and it's reinforced at every level of training and certainly within the supervisory roles of the military police.
And I think you said that if there was a sexual harassment incident, it goes to the officer of the unit first. I think that's what you said. So maybe you could just take us through the steps. So if someone is sexually harassed that is a member, what are the steps taken that they can go to? Like, what are all their options that they have?
Okay. I'll speak for my headquarters.
Sure.
If there's a circumstance where somebody feels that they have been sexually harassed, that person should report it to their supervisor. That supervisor has an obligation, particularly if they're military, has an obligation under QRNOs 4.02 and 5.01 to report any incident of wrongdoing. So it's drilled into our our rules and regulations. Once that complaint is received, we have a duty to act. I have an obligation as commanding officer to act. I will call together an investigation. We have harassment advisors within the unit who help the commanding officer decide the best course of action. And certainly an investigation will take place, administrative investigation will take place to determine the facts and the appropriate measures.
Can they go to the harassment advisor first? Like, is there somewhere, if they don't feel like going to their officer, suppose the officer was the one they're complaining about, what happens then?
Well, there are numerous, vehicle or means to make a complaint. If they don't feel comfortable going to the supervisor, what they should do is go to the next level of supervision, i.e. that supervisor. But they can certainly go to the harassment advisor for the unit, who again has an obligation to act and to report any conduct of that nature to the commanding officer.
Okay, and then now what about tracking? How do you track, for example, how many sexual harassment grievances or reports that you've had? Is that tracked, or how do you track it? Is it something online, or is it just verbal?
I don't track, and we in the military police don't track incidents of sexual harassment or harassment. Chief Military Personnel, I believe, does do the tracking for that. They have a tracking system. The specifics of that I really can't get into. It's not within my realm. However, to date, I've been the commanding officer of the headquarters now for almost 2 years, and I've seen no incidents of sexual harassment, and certainly no trends to indicate that we do have a problem.
Right. How would you address situations in which the employee has experienced sexual harassment at the hand of a client or member of the public? Like, how does the way you address the incident change, versus someone like that's in your unit? So, say the person that would be say the member is in your unit that has been sexually harassed, but the harasser is not in your unit or in your area. It might be a civilian.
Well, again, I think that we would look at that incident and we would contact the other unit and communicate with that other unit to ensure that the behavior is corrected and that the facts of the case are investigated and appropriate acts are taken.
We've had a number of witnesses for this study highlight the importance of leadership and culture in the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace. Has your organization taken any steps to promote healthy behaviors in the workplace, aside from the training that you give them? Is there something else that you do for them? Is there any online tools, for example? Some of the other organizations that we've had here federally have online training that they can go to once a month or once every 2 months, or there's other training in person that's provided as well.
I'm not aware of any online tools right now. I do know that there is training available, and again, I think the Director General of Military Careers or Chief Military Personnel might be better suited to answer that question. I can tell you that when I first got there at the headquarters in 2011, I issued my initial guidance, and in that guidance, it stated categorically that all persons will be treated with dignity and respect, and we review that from time to time. The new people coming into my headquarters will receive a copy of my initial guidance, and it's I guess it's part of our culture day to day.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it is part of the culture too. I mean, I find that with some of the other witnesses, but. So I know from working, in different areas, previous to this. I mean, you go to the conference or you get the training, but then you don't really look at it anymore. So is there something? Is there just a quick follow up that you could answer? Is there a way that you follow up to make sure that this is always embedded in their mind, for example?
A short answer, sir.
What I can tell you is that there are defense administrative orders and directives on harassment, and people are encouraged to review those policies on a yearly basis.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ashton and Ms. Day are splitting their time. Ms. Ashton?
I'd like to pass the microphone on to my colleague.
Day?
First.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to table a motion on behalf of the NDP. I would like to remind the committee that it is our duty to ensure that government policies are fair and equitable for all Canadian men and women. I would also like to remind this committee that as the Status of Women Standing Committee, the status of women in Canada must always be at the heart of our concerns. A study was published recently, and I'm very concerned about it because it states that the EI reforms brought in will affect more women than it will men, and the numbers are very clear. At the beginning of the 1990s, 95% of those individuals who lost their job received benefits. Yet, in 2010, 66% of the men who lost their jobs received benefits, compared to 54.7% of women. The situation is probably going to worsen since the current reforms were introduced, and there's a 12% difference. The members of this committee must acknowledge that Canadian women earn less than men. Immigrant women and those women belonging to visible minorities are overrepresented in low-quality jobs. Women make up 2/3 of those people working part-time. Women are often concentrated in vulnerable employment sectors and seasonal employment. with a view to fostering better matching between good, well-paid jobs and those women who are available on the job market, and to ensure economic growth and optimal conditions to ensure that Canadian women are fulfilling their full potential on the labour market, on behalf of the NDP and in my own name, I am going to table the following motion: that the committee, following its current study, consider the impact of the employment insurance reform implemented in spring 2012 on women's social and economic situations, and particularly on immigrant women, Aboriginal women, part-time workers, and single parents. Madam Chair, thank you for having given me that time, and I am now going to give the floor back to Nikki.
The motion, are you asking then that we discuss this now or at a later date? As procedures,
J'aimerais qu'on en discute maintenant, Madame la Présidente.
I would like us to discuss it now.
You could just bear with us. Members has introduced a motion. As is procedure, we need to deal with this right away unless there is a motion to adjourn the debate to a later date, as the committee wishes. Ms. Troupe.
I would like to move that we go in camera if we're discussing committee business, and these guys will have to wait outside, unfortunately.
Okay.
Unless we're waiting till Tuesday.
There's been a motion that we move in camera, and that is not debatable, so I would ask our witnesses if they wouldn't mind waiting. Is it passed? Is it passed? Well, yeah. All those in favor of moving in camera? All right, so opposed? Opposed? All right. So it has passed. So our witnesses and everyone else will exit the room. Before us. The interest of the committee, do they want Call the meeting back to order. My apologies to the witnesses. Committee business takes priority, and sometimes it has to be done the way it has to be done. So our apologies. We did try to keep it brief. Over to Ms. Day and Ms. Ashton. You have 4.5 minutes left of your time.
Yes, thank you very much to our witnesses. We've heard that as a result of cutbacks, that the alternative dispute resolution centers and services are being reduced across the country. Actually, myself, with a background in conflict resolution, just on the offset, losing these kinds of services for any member to come forward with any sort of harassment allegation is critical, let alone sexual harassment as well. Do you believe that the reduction in alternative dispute resolution centers across the country will affect the number of cases of sexual misconduct that would come to your office? And do you see any other complications that this could cause for individuals in the forces who experience sexual harassment or sexual misconduct?
Thank you for the question. I'm here speaking only on behalf of the military police group, so this really isn't within my area of expertise in terms of the alternate service delivery, the alternate dispute resolution areas.
Given that point, sorry to interrupt, but do complaints from the alternative dispute resolutions that aren't resolved come to you, or is there a link between you and these centers? Has there been a link?
Not to my knowledge, but I will tell you that if there is any belief or doubt as to whether or not the offense goes into the criminal realm, either that it's either an offense under the Code of Service Discipline or the criminal code, it will come to the military police and we will investigate it. As to the rates of sexual harassment, I'm not aware of any concerns at our level at this time.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that there is no link to your knowledge. Would there be any way of perhaps looking into reviewing that and letting us know, even if there was an indirect or something of the sort? Because we've been told that people come forward to ADR to raise sexual harassment, and often there's been positive resolution. Obviously, these aren't criminal in nature, the ones that are resolved. But I'm wondering if perhaps if members of the forces aren't aware, if it is criminal in nature, for example, if ADR would forward it to yourselves, to the military police.
My expectation would be that anyone receiving a complaint where there's even a shadow of a doubt that it's criminal in nature or a Code of Service Discipline offense, the commanding officer of that unit has an obligation to get legal counsel and report the issue to the military police. But again, I'm not aware of any linkages between the alternate dispute resolution centers and the military police. I can certainly find that out and get back to you.
Right. Yeah, we'd really appreciate that feedback. Thank you very much. And I was wondering if you could clearly define how the military distinguishes between sexual harassment and other forms of sexual misconduct.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's a very important point because clearly, when it's sexual harassment, it's, as I mentioned before, it's handled in the administrative realm, where the incident may constitute an offense under the Code of Service Discipline or the criminal code. There are certain elements of the offense that need to be looked at, need to be proven in a court of law, and where there's any doubt, the commanding officer has an obligation to consult with his lawyers and with the military police to determine whether, in fact, that behavior constitutes a crime. And all commanding officers are well aware of that. Would you like to comment?
what I could say is that in those cases where sexual harassment approaches the level of an offense, perhaps under the Code of Service Discipline, something like conduct to the prejudice of good order and discipline, that is where there could be a dual investigation, both administrative and disciplinary, going on at the same time. If, in fact, there is a belief that the incident approaches the level of conduct that would be disciplinary or against the Code of Criminal or against the Code of Service Discipline, the administrative investigation would go into abeyance to allow the military police to do their criminal investigation first, and then it may go back to the administrative investigation as required.
Just wondering, Madam Chair.
Okay. Say you have 10 seconds left. but
Okay,
enough.
that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Crockett?
Thank you. So we've heard that your incidents of sexual harassment that you have observed over the last 2 years when you've been the commander has been virtually nil. And one of the things that we sometimes hear in this committee is that, well, that's because things aren't reported. But on the other hand, we have large organizations like the Post Office who've appeared before us who have actually tracked it and have seen their cases go down to nil. Do you think yours is could be a non-reporting, or are you quite confident from your discussions with the men and women that work with you that you do not have a problem of sexual harassment in the workplace?
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm very confident. The military police are a very professional organization, and I'm very proud to be part of the military police. We have a code of professional conduct that is it's part of our culture. It's part of our very fabric. I'm very confident within our group, within the military police group, that it's got nothing to do with non-reporting and everything to do with a very open and very positive culture that we try to inculcate within our units.
So then, in that vein, what do you think that other departments, areas could learn from how you're doing this? Because the military has been seen in the past as a very masculine organization. We know that your percentage of women is somewhat less than in some other areas, but yet you seem to not have a problem in this area. So what can we learn from what you're doing?
I think I don't know how to respond to that. As I said before, I'm very proud to be a member of the military police. The military police are an essential part of the discipline within the Canadian Armed Forces. We are a tool for the commanding officer to use to ensure that discipline is part of his or her unit. And as I said, discipline is the backbone of the Canadian Forces. So we are very fortunate to have a very disciplined force. And the military police, by their very nature, have to be shown to be the example. In fact, the Canadian Provo Corps, their motto was discipline by example. So, and again, that's inculcated within our young folks at the very, very basic training level.
Mm-hmm. So discipline by example might actually be the motto that you're using to defeat sexual harassment in the workplace. It's calling on people to be an example to others. Like you're actually asking them for a higher quality of respect for one another. Is that right?
Well, certainly the military police are held to a higher standard because we have to police the military. And if that creates a positive work environment, then I would say yes, absolutely.
You know, public awareness programs, we do have quite an impact. So it might be something like that, just spreading that motto through your organization. Is there anything else that you can think of that might be relevant that we might be able to learn from this?
Again, I think that the fact that we have a very progressive training regimen, and that we bring our folks back to the Military Police Academy at various levels of their career, and teach them leadership skills, supervisory skills, and refresher training and everything like that. So again, I think that it's part of the whole package.
Okay. And maybe I could just ask you then, again about the full-time victim services coordinator that you've mentioned here. So it's designed to assist victims, especially those of violent crime. Is that for internal potential victims as well, or external? Or can you tell us some more about that victim services coordinator, how many victim services coordinators you have per unit of staff? Just a little bit more information about that, please.
The Victim Services Program is centrally managed by the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service. There is a Victim Services Officer in each military police detachment. In fact, in CFB Petawawa, we've gone so far as to have an office for the Child and Family Services folks, because we deal very, very closely with those helping agencies like the Military Family Resource Centers, and can refer families to the social services that they require, the helping organizations that they require if they're victims of a crime.
So you're telling me that is an internal person, resource person, then, that you have, the victim services coordinator?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to ask you about the definition, and I commend you because it's a really nice broad definition, so you'd think it would capture many cases. But I'm wondering if maybe it might even be considered too broad if we're trying to define sexual harassment. The behavior has gone beyond gestures or comments. No, let me think. This wasn't the part I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, I'm not readily finding it here. But what would you consider to be your definition? I guess that might be a good way to put it, of sexual harassment. Is it bullying? Is it more than that? How would you define that?
Well, I mean, you've seen, you're referring to the harassment, or sorry, the definition that I gave in my opening remarks.
Right.
I can tell you that within the Canadian Forces Military Police Group, the thing that we, the model, I guess, is, or what we try and tell people is, treat people with dignity and respect. And again, as Major Langlois said, it's when it goes into the realm of criminal or code of service discipline that we get involved as military police, as our function as military police. And again, we're dual professionals, so I'm a member of the military as well. So I have responsibilities as a commanding officer, and that's on the administrative side. I will deal with those issues of harassment or anything like that, although we have not had any in the military police. But as soon as it crosses the line into a code of service discipline or criminal offense, that's when we as military police get involved, because we're obliged to investigate.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel. Ms. Crocker, your time is up. I'm going to take, I'll just take a minute of my time rather than try to make up some of the time we lost when we went in camera. But just how often, Lieutenant Colonel Leger, do they have refresher courses or talks about the issue of sexual harassment and bullying within the military police? Or does that happen at all?
We have, I can speak for within my headquarters, every year, and normally in the August-September timeframe, that's what we call the posting season, when people change jobs, there's movement. Every year we have, I guess, indoctrination training or welcome training, if you will, into the headquarters. And at that time, we go through the internal processes of the headquarters, how it works. And at that time, we, we underline the importance of treating people with dignity and respect. I would expect that happens at every unit that is under the military police group. So, again, I think it's more of a cultural thing. And a leadership, a function of leadership. I would expect that our commanding officers out there would ensure that this is underscored as very important part of leadership.
I visited several of the family resource centers throughout the country, And I don't recall seeing anything specific to sexual harassment or so on, but I thought they were fabulous facilities, and certainly very welcoming and offering the services to all of those in the military. So in spite of the fact that I didn't see anything specific to sexual harassment jump out at me, based on what you're telling us, certainly the leadership is showing that. So thank you very much for that comment. I'm going to turn my time over to Ms. Ashton for the balance of the time.
Is it about 2 minutes? Just to clarify a minute.
No, still 5 minutes.
5? Oh, great.
Just
Okay.
under 5.
Thank you very much. Just going back to the difference between sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, and I appreciate the answer you raised, but I'm just wondering, I mean, there seems to be a gray area there. What would you qualify as being sexual misconduct, like examples?
I can't think to specific examples off the top of my head. Certainly, if there is anything of a sexual nature that's contained within the Code of Service Discipline that is an offense under the Code of Service Discipline, that would constitute sexual misconduct. The DAOD the Defense Administrative Order and Directive on sexual misconduct is fairly clear. And again, I come back to our role in that is to investigate those things that constitute an offense under the Code of Service Discipline or the Criminal Code. For example, Section 264 of the Criminal Code of Canada has criminal harassment, which is very clear, and that's a crime. That's not an administrative matter. That's not sexual harassment. That's criminal harassment. And also, Section 271 of the Criminal Code is your sexual assault. So where there's touching, it automatically turns into sexual assault. Now, how you deal with those particular issues is really the purview of the commanding officer, and he will again consult with his advisors and find the best way to deal with it. And it's based largely on, and some of the factors, of course, is the complainant input. If the complainant says, look, I just want this to stop, and we talk to the individual, in the cases of harassment, we talk to the individual and say, look, this is not on, and it won't happen again, and the complainant is happy with that, then in my mind, my unit, that would suffice, and we would monitor the individual as we go along. Mm-hmm. But clearly, where a crime has been committed, we need to investigate and we need to take action, because that is not tolerated within the Canadian Forces.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because, I mean, we're aware that there have been some egregious examples of sexual assault in the forces, and given and we're also aware that changes have been made to try and deal with that and put a stop to these incidents and also to change the culture. So based on previous presentations we've received, but we're also aware of the fact that that one of the problems is when there's sort of this question of dealing with that gray area before it's clearly identified by somebody as being criminal in nature. There obviously is a spectrum that involves traumatic experiences on particularly women when it's sexual harassment, so what you're saying is when it comes to the commanding officer, it's up to him to decide. I mean, so one commanding officer could deal with it differently than another. Is that a cause for concern? I mean, somebody might take it more lightly than somebody else.
Well, certainly I don't want to speak for the department. I'm speaking for the military police group. I can tell you that we have a number of commanding officers. Each of them I trust implicitly, or explicitly, I guess, implicitly to do the right thing. And they are given the training and the judgment to make those calls. And again, it comes down very much to a function of leadership.
Do they have regular training? I think Ms. Sgro may have had a question on that. But I mean, do these commanding officers come together and sort of look at best practices? I mean, is there any sort of overarching structure here that they could that could help deal with sort of more of a structured, consistent practice of dealing with sexual harassment, rather than just sort of one commanding officer does it one way and another does another?
Yes, thank you. The Canadian Forces Provost Marshal and our commander deals with his sub-commanders on a daily basis, and each of the commanding officers has with him a chief warrant officer who's the senior non-commissioned member rank within the Canadian Forces, to provide him that kind of consultation and guidance, if you will. They've been there, they've done it, they've got the experience, and certainly we expect our chief warrant officers to provide us that sage counsel to make sure. And again, the chief warrant officers, their role is the morale and well-being of the troops, to put it bluntly. So each commanding officer has a number of consultants and advisors upon which he relies.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Legere and Major. We appreciate you both coming. We have completed your section of the testimony, and I thank you both very much for coming. And we'll get our next witness, as if you could be excused, so our next witnesses could come to the table. I'm not suspending. Lewis for Field Operations for the Ontario Provincial Police. Thank you very much for coming. We waited with much anticipation for you to come before the committee today. I think the committee has lots of questions, and we look forward to your helping us in our sexual harassment interest here in this report. Mr. Lewis, you have 10 minutes for your opening remarks, and then you'll have questions from the committee. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, and good morning or afternoon, I guess, now to all the committee members. My pleasure to appear before you today. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with information about how the Ontario Provincial Police is committed to fostering and sustaining an inclusive, respectful, diverse, equitable, and accessible workplace for all employees. First, let me set my remarks in context by outlining a few relevant details about the OPP in my time with the service. I joined the OPP in 1978, when the police profession was still then very much an old boys club with lots of a macho, tough guy attitude. Women were first recruited to become officers in 1974, but there were very few on the job in the OPP when I arrived as a rookie constable 4 years later. In the first few years, the OPP would not post women officers to many of the remote locations we police in the province, considering it an undue hardship for female officers. I'm not sure if that was an advantage or a disadvantage for our early women officers, but I can tell you that we now post them to remote locations, and many find that experience very interesting. I think it is fair to say that many of the leaders and officers within the OPP at that time were not as supportive of female officers as they should have been. Those first few female officers were definitely pioneers, and sometimes they had to be better and tougher than the male recruits because they were so closely scrutinized. A number of OPP members did not want them to succeed. Thankfully, the OPP, the police profession, society as a whole, has come a long way since then in our attitudes towards women occupying what were then traditionally male roles. December 31st, 2012, the OPP had 6,243 uniformed members, 191 of them being commissioned officers. And a commissioned officer is any uniformed member who holds the rank of inspector or higher, up to and including commissioner. As of the same date, 20.4% of the OPP's uniformed members were women. 14.7% of the OPP's commissioned officers were women at the end of 2012. And allow me to put that into context provincially and nationally. According to Statistics Canada's Police Resources in Canada, women comprised 18.4% of all police officers in Ontario in 2010, slightly lower than the OPP percentage. The proportion of female police officers across Canada in the same year was 19.6%, again slightly lower than the OPP percentage. In the same report, the province of Quebec reported the highest proportion of female police officers at 23.7%, while Manitoba the lowest at 14.8%. This places the OPP in the upper mid-range for the national average and slightly above the provincial average for the percentage of women officers in the ranks. Does the OPP have enough female officers today? Are women properly represented in the OPP in senior ranks? And the answer is definitely no to both those questions. An interesting note, the situation is reversed for our civilian employees, where 62.7% are women, 37.3% men. I'm pleased to note that 40 of our civilian managers in the OPP are women, 18 are men, so the figures properly reflect the overall gender representation for civilians in the OPP. The OPP also tries to have its workforce reflect the communities it serves, so we want to remove any barriers that might discourage women from choosing policing as a profession. One of those barriers was removed in 1982 when the Supreme Court of Canada decided or ruled that height and weight restrictions for employees had to be directly related to the capacity to do the work, not imposed as an overall standard. Another operational barrier or concern was addressed in 91 when we changed our standard operating procedures to acknowledge that pregnant employees who could not fulfill their regular duties because of their condition could be assigned to alternate duties that they could be reasonably expected to perform. And that was a significant decision for us. There are, of course, some unavoidable aspects of police work that could be viewed as barriers facing women and others interested in joining the police profession. Most officers work shifts their entire career. We see a lot of tragedy that can be difficult to handle psychologically. The profession requires an advanced level of lifelong fitness, and an officer must face a lot of abuse without overreacting. While it's true that policing was traditionally a male-dominant profession, it is over a generation ago that women were first recruited into our ranks, and it's a fact that only a handful of our currently serving male officers were even members of the organization prior to having female members working alongside them. The OPP is continuing to work hard to recruit women and remove any barriers to promoting qualified women to its senior ranks through a variety of effective programs. It's notable that the 11 recruiters in our Career Development Bureau are comprised of 9 women. We know that we have to continue this work and these initiatives until women are much better represented in OPP ranks. Policing is not for everyone, but one of the ways we can reach our recruiting goals is by making the OPP a very welcoming and supportive place for women, which brings me to the very important subject of sexual harassment in the workplace. The OPP defines sexual harassment as a course of comments or conduct based on sex or gender that is unwelcome or should be reasonably known to be unwelcome. Discrimination is when a female employee alleges she was treated unfairly because she is a woman. Of course, a male employee can also complain that he was treated unfairly because of his gender, but that is a very rare complaint in the OPP. I will provide more detail on that later. But to understand our approach, I need to tell you a few things about the OPP and the legislation and regulations that guide us. The OPP is part of the Ontario Public Service, and as such is governed by the Ontario Public Service Workplace Discrimination and Harassment Prevention Policy, WDHP. Sexual harassment, sexual solicitation, and related reprisals are violations under this policy. The WDHP policy establishes a framework for the prevention of workplace discrimination and harassment, as well as an effective response to issues and complaints. The WDHP policy also provides direction to the OPP on compliance with statutory requirements for human rights and health and safety in the workplace, as established in the Ontario Human Rights Code and Occupational Health and Safety Act. In addition, uniformed members of the OPP are governed by the provisions of a code of conduct under the Ontario Police Services Act, and I provided copies of these policies to your committee clerk. Among other things, the OPP's Career Development Bureau is responsible for implementing, overseeing, and investigating complaints for WDHP policy within the OPP. And it's worthy to note that the Career Development Bureau is commanded by a female chief superintendent who is responsible for all of the OPP's human resources activities, including recruiting and hiring of all staff, promotional processes, staffing and workforce planning, grievance processes, labor relations, and all training internally and externally. That bureau is assisted in their WDHP work by a respectful workplace committee. The mandate of the committee is to serve as executive champions of organizational efforts to address and improve all elements of respect in the workplace. They meet regularly, review and make recommendations regarding the management of complex WDHP cases, identify trends and emerging issues that are systemic and or have an organizational impact, provide consultation and advice on WDHP program development and enhancement, such as the development and criteria for cases requiring investigation, and they support the shift of the workplace culture from one of conflict avoidance to one of prevention and conflict resolution. The Human Resources section of our Career Development Bureau has also developed a service delivery model for the OPP, which includes, among other things, mandatory and ongoing education and training on WDHP for all personnel, a WDHP standard operating procedure that sets out the roles and responsibilities for employees and managers and provides instructions on reporting and responding. OPP members can contact a confidential and neutral source of information, either our WDHP employee contacts or the employee program assistance provider, if they wish to discuss concerns without necessarily triggering a process that they do not want to pursue. All OPP managers are required to consult with human resources as soon as they become aware of a WDHP issue, whether or not a complaint is filed, and managers are expected to initiate cases for situations that need intervention even when no one has complained. We've established an internal network of trained OPP managers known as the WDHP liaisons to assist with resolution and investigation with the support and guidance of human resources, and this group has grown from the original 6 members to 35 members in the past 3 years. We practice restoration of workplaces and or working relationships impacted by complaints or resolution processes. So our Career Development Bureau tracks and reports on all our WDHP cases so we can determine the extent of problems and take systemic action where required. And I certainly wouldn't complain or claim that the OPP is perfect and cannot improve upon its prevention and response to sexual harassment in the workplace. But I do believe the policies and actions I've described provide us with proper structure and a way to deal positively with all forms of harassment. In 2012, we had 118 WDHP complaints in the OPP. The largest single reason cited for the complaints was sex or gender at 20% or 24% of the complaints. I should make it clear here that the majority of these cases, 13 in total, cited gender as reason for discrimination rather than sexual harassment. So of the 118 complaints in 2012, 11 alleged sexual harassment. Of those 11, 10 were substantiated and actions taken to correct the problem. Of the 13 cases that alleged discrimination based on gender, 4 were substantiated and action taken. In 2012, 96% of our WDHP complaints based on gender, for a total of 23 out of 24, were made by female employees. As I said earlier, one of the ways we make the OPP a welcoming place for female employees is through education and raising awareness of what is and what is not acceptable in the workplace. We inform managers of the responsibility to not condone or tolerate harassment of any kind, and our goal is to completely eliminate all forms of harassment, but we must be practical and realistic. Given human nature, our scope of operations, which includes more than 9,000 employees, and a workplace spread out over a province bigger than most countries, it is likely that some form of harassment will occur occasionally. So we ask ourselves the following questions in conclusion. Does the employer make it clear that sexual harassment will not be tolerated? Does the employer educate its employees on how to recognize harassment, what to do about it? Is there a fair and transparent complaint process with no tolerance for reprisals? Are employees who come forward with a complaint supported throughout the process? And does the employer practice workplace restoration so everyone involved, directly and peripherally, can safely return to a productive career? And I'm proud to say that the answer is yes to all of those questions. And I'm also very proud of the fine men and women in the OPP and the professional way they conduct themselves at all times. So thank you for your attention, and I'm pleased to answer any questions in terms of how we try to prevent, investigate, and correct instances of sexual harassment in the workplace.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lewis, for that excellent presentation. We'll turn it over now for 7 minutes to Ms. Young.
And I'd like to thank you, Commissioner Lewis, for an excellent presentation. You gave us a lot to work with in terms of the scope of your program, the extent of the fact that you are 9,000 employees over a very, very large area, the province of Ontario. And I also want to talk to you a bit about the fact that, I think you said you joined the force in 1978, is that correct?
Right, yes.
And, of course, since that time, we've kind of come a long way, baby, right?
Well, for sure. We had very few women then, and that number has increased more and more over the years to our current day.
Now, one of the statistics, and I think I may have missed it in your presentation, is what percentage of your workforce are now women?
Our percentage of our workforce currently is 20-point-something% female across the board. Okay. It's interesting to note that of the thousands of applicants we get each year, only 11% are female. But we've managed to get our numbers up to over 20% female employees. In fact, our last class of 110 recruits was over 50% female. So we're luring more women and making policing more attractive to females. And interesting, that chief superintendent I spoke of, the females in charge of the Career Development Bureau, she's my wife. And a career police officer, and she has seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly in her career, and so she brings a very interesting perspective to her efforts in Career Development Bureau.
So are your numbers higher now because you have an active engagement plan or strategy in place, or is it because you have put these measures in place to protect women in the workforce and that people are hearing or knowing about that and choosing policing as a career option?
I think it's all of the above, ma'am. We're certainly trying to make policing more attractive to all people in society, including people from that are not first or maybe fourth or fifth generation Canadians that have come from countries where policing is not attractive, and particularly to women. I mean, women are approximately 51% of society. Why are our numbers so low in terms of the applicants? We have a variety of programs to get out in the community, engage female potential recruits for both civilian and uniform roles, and through female recruiters are actively out at job fairs and colleges and universities. That's having a very successful impact on the number that we're actually recruiting current day.
Now, although this study is about sexual harassment, and I want to move on because I have some other questions,
yeah.
How many of those women, or proportionately, do you think go into management? Because that's obviously one of the other issues about women in non-traditional roles.
Many of our female members are seeking the supervisory roles at the sergeant and staff sergeant level. The lower supervisory roles, not many are seeking the commissioned officer higher rank roles. We've just had this discussion in the last few months and really want to implement a study to find out, are there systemic barriers? My wife doesn't think there are in her role. She thinks she's actually been given opportunities herself that she may not have got as a male, because we're trying to get more females in specific roles. Whether or not that's a fair interpretation or not is up to her. So we need to do more. We're just not sure what. But I think in our organization, to get the experience for the senior officer roles, it often requires moving around the province or taking jobs with lots of overtime and working night and day, and and that is difficult for some of our female members, particularly those that are mothers and may or may not have husbands that are as understanding. That's a whole other element that's beyond my control. But we need to do all we can to develop those females without having to move them around if they don't so choose to.
Right. Thank you so much for that, and obviously it'll be interesting in a couple of years to hear back from you as to how you're doing with that.
I may be gone, but my wife will still be around.
Well, 35 years is very impressive of being on the force, so
Thank you.
We acknowledge and congratulate you on that. I wanted to just say that one of the things that you clearly identified, and I don't know if these are steps or just points, but I made a quick note of them, is that you felt that it was important, number one, for the employer to have clarity about what the rules were, to educate your members about what the rules were, to have a fair, open complaint process, to have your employees supported throughout the complaint process,
Right.
and to have workplace restoration
Correct.
after that fact.
Correct.
I mean, is that sort of a summary of
It
what
is
you
for
said?
sure, yes.
And do you think that over your 35 years that this is At what point in time was this implemented?
I can't say there was a benchmark in there clear to me. Just initially, I know things happened that should not have happened. And at times they were properly dealt with, times they weren't reported, and at times weren't effectively dealt with. And over the years, that has got to the point now where everybody knows the processes. Everybody understands that it won't be tolerated, and everybody sees action taken when it occurs. Now, are there still some people who don't report it? That is possible, but I think that's changed greatly too. I think our people are more apt to come forward with these issues now than they ever were because they see the support and leadership throughout the organization that it will be taken on and reprisals won't be tolerated.
Now, in many other of our witnesses, what we've heard about is that there's sort of an informal complaints process where somebody says, you know, somebody made some gestures, or it's very sort of the beginnings of harassment, and I just want it stopped.
Yes.
And so people are talked to, and that clarity, as we just spoke about, or education happens, and then that's fine. It never comes to a complaint process.
Right.
But in your case, based on what you said, everything is a complaint, or everything is documented.
Everything will be
or
documented.
investigated.
That's right. But if, for example, a member comes forward and says, I just want him to not say that ever again, or ask me out again, and it's clearly stopped, and the complainant doesn't want it to go any further than that, it is still documented and it's tracked. So it's within our statistics. So there's some record that did occur.
Now, in some other witnesses that we've had before us, and some other employers, what we've heard is after a year or two, that information gets shredded and it disappears. What happens in your case?
The statistics are never shredded and disappear. If Constable, John Doe says something that is inappropriate, is pointed out to him, and he does not do it, it stops then, and the complainant's happy, that will not be on Constable John Doe's record past 2 years.
Okay.
But there may be, for 2 years, it'll be in there that the supervisor had to speak to John Doe and say, don't say that. It's very inappropriate for these reasons. Yes, I understand. I won't do it again. And if that's the end of it, then it's off the individual's personnel record.
Thank you very much. Ms. Young, I'm afraid your time is up. Mrs. Ania.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lewis, I'd like to thank you for your testimony today. You spoke about a committee that it was established within the OPP to promote respect in the workplace. Could you expand on that and tell us what its role has been in reducing any cases of sexual harassment?
I hate to ask you to repeat it.
Vous avez parlé d'un...
And so you were speaking to the committee about a committee that was established in 2008, and I'd like to know how that committee has contributed to reducing the rate of sexual harassment in the workplace.
People that look at best practices, trends that they've seen, the need for further education in the organization, become a kind of a center of knowledge in terms of what is occurred in cases. So there's almost precedent set that if someone says X or Y, here's really where it fits into the big scheme of things in terms of disciplinary or action or potential resolutions. And so, and because the commander of our Recruitment and Development Bureau is also the chair of that committee, that's the narrow part of the hourglass for the OPP. And so, and it's all tracked through there. So they become really the subject matter experts in terms of giving advice to investigators and workplace harassment advisors or liaisons that are across the OPP. It becomes that center of excellence, basically, to make sure we're all doing things the same way.
Est-ce que les membres qui...
Are the members of that committee experts in sexual harassment at all?
That, of course, study this type of activity and are really in touch with what's going on across the workforce, particularly within the Ontario Public Service, which, of course, is thousands and thousands of more employees besides the OPP. So they certainly become more of a center of knowledge for us than the average manager or supervisor in the organization, because they hear and see it all from across the public service. So they know what's happening out there, what the trends are, and if we needed to do something or communicate something because of some trend they're seeing, whether it be in the public service or within the OPP, then they're on it, and we can communicate that quickly and try to prevent that sort of activity from occurring.
À quelle fréquence est-ce
How often does that committee look into any violence or sexual harassment incidents? Do you have any statistics?
How would that committee, in terms of what they have seen or recognized, or how often? I do know that, just from my role as commissioner, that there are no glaring systemic issues out there. There are one-offs with 9,000 employees. To have 10, 15 complaints of that nature a year, one is too many, but the ones we do have, I know are very swiftly and appropriately dealt with. And if the complainant is not happy, then he or she, often she, in the vast majority of cases, has the ability to take that further. You can go to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal or put in a grievance through their bargaining group. And so I really can't say that there's any serious issues have occurred in the OPP in recent years. Some years back, and we've demoted some very senior people right back to the bottom of the organization in terms of the rank over some of these issues. So that sent a shockwave through the organization because people realize, wow, they're, from a senior leader perspective, they're down back to be a constable. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned and that sort of thing, and having that properly communicated. Without naming names, those situations became very public in the organization.
Merci. Vous parliez d'un traitement dans un délai.
You spoke about a reasonable time period. What do you feel a reasonable time period is to deal with something?
Circumstances and a variety. There's a variety of factors there. We certainly try to resolve these within 2 months, but we often don't. Because sometimes. There's issues around investigation and interviews and things like that. But generally speaking, the vast majority ours are resolved without it going to any kind of a hearing or a tribunal. Alternative dispute resolution. Some action, like a supervisor actually moved to another area because he or she has created a poison environment for that employee. We're not going to move the employee unless he or she wants to be moved. But sometimes the supervisor is moved, and everything's documented and they're dealt with, but not necessarily are they brought before a discipline tribunal and maybe lose pay or rank, depending on the severity of it. But our Respectful Workplace Committee and our WDHP liaison officers deal regularly with our Professional Standards Bureau, who are the ones that really deal with more serious discipline issues. And if there's any gray areas, like some of the previous witnesses described, we have them too. Is this full discipline, or can this be resolved? Often that's at the choice of the complainant. But they do have the dialogue, and they make sure that they're working from the same song sheet, so to speak, in terms of how they're going to address these things.
Merci. Vous parliez d'à peu près 33% de...
You stated about 33% are women in your ranks. Do you have a percentage of women who belong to visible minorities?
And it's about 20% of the OPP is female on the uniform side. About 60% of our civilian staff are females, which are more administrative jobs where there's steady days, weekends off, and not shift work, and lab assistants and a variety of other things. But I do not have before me the stats, and I don't even know about the other visible minorities. Well, some of that is self-disclosure issues. Do certain members, male or female, want to disclose their heritage or things that maybe aren't necessarily visible? So we don't basically go around and check boxes off, okay, someone's of a certain color or a certain religion. So when we don't do that, we don't keep those kinds of statistics. Male, female is easier to keep, so we track that, but we don't have those other statistics.
Est-ce que vous avez des statistiques?
Do you have any numbers regarding women who are in the higher ranks?
The commission officer rank, which are inspector up to commissioner, I don't have the number right in front of me. I did mention it earlier, and it's in the material that I provided the clerk. I believe is 14-point-something% versus 20% overall in the organization. For example, we have 4 deputy commissioners, 1's female. We have X number of chief superintendents, so many are female. But to get to those levels, you often have 25, 30 years of experience. And given that at one time we hired a few women a year, and then more a year, and now a generation, some have retired from 1974, the vast majority have, but that bubble is getting bigger as time goes on, as those females are getting up into more experience and more years in the organization, they're starting to emerge more and more at the higher level. So our previous commissioner, two back, was female, Gwen Boniface. And we had a number of deputy commissioners that have been female. So it's, other than that, it's hard to give you any definitive statistics of what I presented, on top of what I presented.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We'll now move over to Ms. Bateman.
Very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, sir. I really have appreciated your comments, and I particularly have appreciated your responses. And you're clearly an organization that's taking this issue seriously. Now, I have a list of questions that I'm going to start on, but I want to follow up on one of your responses first. You said that you take, if a person has harassed someone, ultimately you will demote. Now, that's a very impressive, and you said that this has, in fact, happened.
It has happened, yes.
In your organization. I just think of all the unions that we're dealing with in the Public Service of Canada, and if a person at the EX3 level offends, they still get paid at the EX3 level. What are the logistics for you to actually demote somebody who offends in that way?
It's been a number of years since we did it. I know two individuals personally that were involved. One was an inspector and was demoted all the way to sergeant. Another was a staff sergeant.
And that included his pay? He wasn't just red-circled?
Yeah, he was red-circled. So eventually he
didn't
suddenly lose $30,000 a year.
Okay.
In either case, but so they're red-circled at their current rate, but their position then was at a lower level. So they're no longer managers, no longer supervisors. They were put in positions where they were working alongside people that they used to supervise.
Wow, that's a real way to change things. And
we haven't had any recent cases, ma'am, where so there's no kind of legal precedent in terms of appeals of that. And I don't know what the processes were back then in terms of whether they appealed it or just accepted it. It'd be interesting to see if we did it current day, how that would legally would proceed through different tribunals and adjudicators. But I'm proud to say we haven't had to do it because we haven't had that.
Yeah, and once you do that once or twice, I don't think you...
Well, it certainly sent a real shockwave. One day you're wearing a white shirt and you're in charge of a pile of people, and the next day you're not.
Yeah,
and so it showed we're willing to hold everybody to the same standard, not just the lower-ranking people.
That's outstanding. I think that is something we have to examine closely at this committee if we want to affect real change in the workplace that we're doing this investigation on. Now, on the another one of your responses, this 2-year, you can be a bad person, get documented, and then suddenly your slate is wiped clean. In the federal public service, that becomes a problem, and of course our study is on the federal public service.
Right.
It becomes a real problem because there's so much churn, as they say, especially in the National Capital Region. People just hop jobs so they can be absolutely have unacceptable behavior. 2 years, they're cleansed, they move on, they get a promotion. You said that you keep the statistics in perpetuity.
Yes.
But the actual, this is in Joe Smith's file, and that's on the file for 2 years that he's been examined or that he had to be spoken to.
That's right.
And then it goes away. Are there any retention pieces if it's a serious...
Oh, yes.
Okay, please elaborate on that, because I think we in the federal public service could learn what you're doing on that one.
If it's what we call informal discipline, in other words, a written warning, a verbal counseling session with a senior officer, this was wrong, you shouldn't have done it, don't do it again, that stays in their record for 2 years. If it's gone past that to that higher level where they've actually been charged with an offense under a discipline process, then that stays and convicted, that stays in their record forever.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's in their record forever.
It is. Now, they can apply, and there can be a process to maybe have it removed 25 years after the fact. I'm not aware of that occurring. I know the potential is there. And it's interesting, too, because if you're a 5-year officer and you're convicted of discreditable conduct, that'll be in your record forever. So when you retire at 30 years of age, and this is my understanding of it, and, of course, I fortunately haven't had any of those things in my record that have stuck with me to worry about, but others that have. I've seen the files. When they retire, they don't get a retirement scroll from the commissioner signed to say they've performed 30 years of exemplary work, because they did.
Wow.
They might have performed 29, but they had a gap in there. So they get a scroll that basically says, thanks for being here, as opposed to you did an amazing job, an exemplary service, and, so we changed the wording on those.
Bravo.
On those, yeah.
I think the public service of Canada could learn a lot from you, because regardless, the people who offend in the public service, as long, after the 2 years,
Point of order.
Really,
Point of order here, yes.
Okay, is my clock stopped for her point of order? Okay. That's remarkable, Sarah. Thank you.
With all the respect, the repeated reference to the public service, I mean, we're also looking at the RCMP, the Canadian Forces. This is the OPP. I think we've got a lot to learn.
All public service.
I'm sorry, guys.
This is not a
excuse
point
me,
of order.
Committee, Ms. Ashton, I don't think that's a point of order, frankly. I'll go back to Ms. Bateman. We'll start the clock again.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And our intention, sir, with this study is to ensure that anyone in public service has behavior that is beyond reproach, and that we create workplaces that are places that we would want to work in ourselves. That's the intention. That is the intention. So we do have a lot to learn from your practices, and you clearly are not an organization that's just talking the talk. You are an organization that is walking the talk as well.
Well, we're certainly trying, and as a previous witness said, you try to set the example at the leadership level, and model the behavior that you expect the rest of the organization to actually achieve.
Yeah.
And would some employees say we didn't do things right in some cases? Would some employees say they didn't feel they were properly dealt with? Without a doubt. Unfortunately, that would be the case, but we certainly try our best.
Yeah.
And if
Now,
we make mistakes, we try to learn from them
Exactly.
and then move forward and not make those same mistakes again.
How do you handle the, do you have an EAP
Oh, yes.
program?
We do.
And is it arm's length from the management?
It is.
Okay.
Yes, all we get from a management perspective from our employee assistance program, which is an external service provider that's hired by us to provide those services, psychological and counseling and different things, all we get is statistical reports from them with no names. They have an obligation to tell us if someone is maybe suicidal or may harm someone else, but short of that, we never know names. And we just know so many constables received counseling, so many sergeants received
Counseling.
whatever. It's
So they've
kept at a
never
very
picked
high
up the
level.
phone?
Thank you.
Oh.
Ms. Bateman, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Thank you, sir. I really...
Your time is over. Yes, Commissioner Lewis, thank you so much. This has been well worth waiting for. You were on our list of witnesses very early on in the study, and I'm really glad that you've come now, because it's been extremely helpful listening to how progressive you really are.
Thank you. Yeah,
So
we're very proud of our
pleased,
organization.
I know Ms. Boniface very well, and she always had really good things to say. When I've had several meetings with her, nothing to do with this, but about her career in the OPP. The issue to do with bullying and harassment, because some people are saying that over and above the sexual harassment section, harassment is very much another form of bullying.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of policies do you have when it comes to, quote, what you would classify as bullying versus harassment? Do you have a policy different from one to the other, or would you suggest they're probably mutually the same?
We consider harassment, non-sexual harassment, like workplace harassment,
Yes.
And bullying to be the same thing. And, I'd have to really look closely at the wording to see how that works. But bullying, supervisor treating someone unfairly, treating some employees differently than others in a negative way, that really many would call that bullying, but that's harassment if it's non-sexual or not occurring because of gender, just because a supervisor or manager is mean and doesn't treat people right. That's harassment. It's just not sexual harassment. So it still fits within our WDHP complaint process.
The 50% of your latest class coming through being women is really something that I think makes all of us as Canadians being very proud of that fact, that they feel that comfortable. It's very different than what we're hearing at the RCMP level, for all kinds of different reasons, I'm sure. Have you had any consultation? Has there been a request from the RCMP to the OPP for suggestions on to what your policies are? Because clearly you're having good success, and anyone could see that.
I'm not aware of any. I know the Chief Superintendent in charge of our Career Development Bureau sits on a Chiefs of Police Human Resources Committee that meets nationally. The RCMP are a big part of that committee. They just met last week in Vancouver, actually. And they discuss trends and things and try to learn from one another, but that's all I can really say that I know occurs on a regular basis.
The fact that the discipline has been as severe with a couple of individuals as it has been, that you had alluded to before. The fact, though, that the pay gets red-circled, even though they get demoted from an inspector down to a constable or a staff sergeant, I find that very interesting, that the pay didn't, because often, it's the pay that really matters in some cases, but for someone to continue to receive an inspector's pay when they have been demoted significantly, I find it interesting. Why was the decision to just red circle their wages at the time?
I don't know the rationale. It was some years back. I can speak to two that happened more recently, but those ones way back when, I think that the thought process was, and arguably from a legal perspective, is that to take away their pay may have cost some of them their mortgage. It may have been maybe $30,000, $40,000 a year, depending on, and that's quite a big fine. You don't get that big of a fine for impaired driving, for example, rightly or wrongly. So that was probably the rationale. We've had two in recent years, a sergeant who was an acting staff sergeant and a staff sergeant that was just about to be promoted to inspector had been approved. Both of them were denied their promotions. Actually, this acting staff sergeant was about to be promoted as well. And in the meantime, things came to light that were proven in relation to workplace harassment issues of a sexual nature, and both of them lost their promotions. So they never did get their raise. They're just about to get a raise of about 10%. So you're looking $10,000-$15,000 increase in pay, and it was lost and gone. And they did not get their promotions over this very behavior. Those are the most. So that was, they hadn't got the raise yet, so we weren't really taking away what had been the salary they were used to for several years. And so maybe a little different circumstances. But I certainly get your point. If I could snap my fingers and say you lose the pay too, then I would.
One of the things that we've heard from many of the people who have come before the committee is about leadership. And to have the right culture in any organization, it's about leadership, and it starts at the top. So, that's very admirable. How often do you have sessions on sexual harassment, bullying amongst your various key staff members?
We call them NCOs, Sergeants and Staff Sergeants. There's a number of conferences annually across the OPP, and I can't say there is always something on the agenda relating to this, but if there are any kind of new issues or trends or anything that are being seen, then that is communicated to them at that time. Same with our senior officers in all their meetings where with inspectors up all get together. We have stuff on our internal website, our intranet site, that outlines all the policies. And anything new is flagged right away, so people will have to go in and read it. We have Ontario Public Service training that comes out often annually, but not necessarily every year. We actually have to go in and go through a video and answer questions online, and it's tracked. So if one of your employees does not read it and go through it and actually check the boxes, not just say they read it, then that is flagged to a supervisor, and then the supervisor makes sure they go and read that. So, and there's many other things that occur like that. I can't say that they happen every year, but a lot of that happens a lot in the organization, right across the entire public service, much of that, not just within the OPP.
Exactly.
And so it's out there a lot. Some think that it happens too often. Another video, but you know what? Sometimes any publicity ends up being a positive thing, whether the employee finds it negative or not. And our stats show that clearly we're doing something right because our numbers are very low. As I said, one is too many. But
a reminder is always good.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lewis will now move over to Ms. James.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our guest today, our witness, for being here. Now, you just were talking about stats, and you're saying our stats show that something must be working. I've been writing down some of the statistics that you have given in your opening remarks, and I seem to only have statistics written down for 2012 with regards to 11 alleged incidents and 10 that were substantiated. Have you kept any statistics prior to that, and can you tell us what the trends are from year over year?
I don't have the statistics with me. We certainly kept the stats in the years prior to that. And I'm told anecdotally that our stats are down. But I don't think we ever had a significant issue where, for example, let's say hypothetically 1,000 employees put in complaints. I don't think we've ever had any huge spikes, but I think that what I've been told anecdotally, once again, is the trend continues to lower.
And can you tell me if the trend that you believe is going down year over year, is the incidents that are actually substantiated, are the severity of those incidents also going down, or I guess I'm trying to find out, you said that there was 10 that were substantiated.
Right.
Could you give me an example of maybe the less severe incident and what the action taken against that employee might have been versus perhaps the incident which had the biggest or the largest severity to it and what that disciplinary action might have been?
Certainly.
Without obviously giving names or
For sure. And I'm reluctant to say what's less severe because to some people may have been, more upsetting than you might think just looking at circumstances because people are different. But let's say a supervisor asks out a constable. A male supervisor asks a female constable that works for him out on a date. And the constable says that, I've got a year on the job. To say no to a supervisor, may hurt my career. That may be, it's totally inappropriate and it would be dealt with, but that may be somewhat less serious to many than constant harassment, going to her home, calling her, sending her love letters by text or email, which would be more on the serious side. In the case of one going to be promoted to staff sergeant, who's an acting staff sergeant, that was actually lost his promotion over it. Yeah, this was actually it was a couple of years prior to that, but I'm just to put it into perspective in terms of more serious. He was actually having an ongoing relationship. He was married. She was married to another. She was married to another officer, and it was just an ongoing relationship. And she had mental health issues to deal with as a result, and off work, and a lot of things came to light during that. That cost him a promotion, and it's in his file for the rest of his career.
Thank you, and I'm glad you mentioned that again about a supervisor asking out another employee. I guess someone below, subordinate to that person.
Right.
You'd mentioned it earlier on in one of your answers that an incident might be asking someone out, and they don't really want that to happen again.
Yep.
Do you consider that in itself to be sexual harassment, or would it have to continue past the point of, no, I'm not interested in you, thank you, but I'm not interested, and then the persistent continues after that? Like, I'm just trying to find out, because many people would not think someone asking them out on a date would be harassment.
Right.
What is the point when it becomes actually sexual harassment within the OPP?
I think it changes. It's a bit of a gray area. As to where is the line. A direct supervisor asking out an employee, in my view, is totally inappropriate. Someone of a higher rank asking someone out of a lower rank that works in a total different area of the organization, and that is just human nature. But if it becomes the individual knows it's unwelcome, then it better stop quick.
Thank you. And I'm glad you've said that, because I ask this question from time to time to our witnesses regarding fraternization, dating, mingling, so on. Now, I know your wife is within the OPP, so I guess the answer is it's allowed.
Yeah. We have a number of married couples.
At least you've told everybody it publicly now, so it must be allowed.
I always thought it'd be the other way around, and I'd be actually of a lower rank.
But you've said something interesting. You believe that someone in a supervisory or management position should not necessarily have the opportunity or be allowed to ask someone who reports directly to them or through that chain. Has the OPP ever, I know that you said you're governed by the Ontario Public Service, but has the OPP ever thought of implementing their own policy or modifying a policy or making some sort of a regulation that's really not permitted or it's frowned upon or it could lead into situations of sexual harassment and so on. Because I tend to agree with you, when you're in a management position to someone below you, it could be deemed, as you said.
Time is up. I've been kind of
thank
stretching
you.
it.
I'm used to 7, so it goes
Commissioner
quick.
Lewis, do you want? Yeah, it's the 5 minute. Do you want to quickly try to
Sure.
answer the question?
I can't say that we have never considered it because I don't know what's happened prior to me being an executive level. It currently does not exist, but it generally is viewed, and as I say, we keep track of trends and what happens and what's viewed as being X or Y and what's not. That one would be viewed, direct reporting relationship, as harassment, and it may be just a case of it's unwelcome, please don't do it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Ms.
Sorry.
Moran, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll give you the time to put your earpiece on. Thank you. And thank you for coming before the committee today. I wanted to tell you that I think that all the measures you have set up in order to reduce barriers to women in the OPP are very good and interesting. That having been said, our study is about sexual harassment and not recruitment. So I'd like to tell you that it was difficult for us to get information about the number of complaints of sexual harassment within the OPP, and the same is true about procedures and how these complaints are dealt with. Now, you told us during your testimony that there had been 78 complaints in 2012 and that there were 10 cases that were actually substantiated. So I have questions about that. Why is it difficult for us to get information about complaints that that may have been filed within the OPP? Why aren't they made public? That's my first question. And my second question is this. You said that individuals had raised concerns but hadn't necessarily filed complaints. I'd like to know if you keep any statistics on that, on the numbers of individuals who may have raised their concerns with you. And then, could you tell us what stages a complaint goes through when it is dealt with? I know that there is a committee for promoting respect in the workplace and that they have a very important role to play in dealing with those complaints. But when a complaint is filed, how is it dealt with exactly? And if I have any more time, I will have more questions to ask you.
Thank you for that. First of all, it was 118 complaints in 2012 as opposed to 78. Why that isn't put out publicly, I mean, obviously we never put out names. That just goes without saying. Why we don't put out stats if we're asked by government organizations, I don't know. I don't think we have anything to hide. So it's a good question. I don't have an answer to it. There may be some legal reason I'm not aware of, but I certainly will find that out. The second part of your question was, do we keep stats on people that have just raised concerns? I believe we do. I'm not sure how they interplay with that 118 figure that I gave you, or how they don't. I don't really know, but I will find that out as well, and I can get that back to the clerk. And your last question, I'm sorry, the third part was.
I wanted to know when complaints actually are filed or when concerns are raised, I want to know exactly how they're dealt with, through which body. For example, you spoke about a reasonable time frame, but I want to know, once a complaint has been filed, what exactly happens afterwards?
It's filed. It goes right to that area within our Career Development Bureau in our Human Resources section. To an area that's all they do is this sort of work. I shouldn't say that's all they do, but it's a big part of what they do. Sometimes it's very obvious that it is fairly minor, to use that word, even though some would say none of it's ever minor. Sometimes it's very obvious that it's more severe. It may even be criminal harassment, like actually following someone around or something like that. So depending on the decision then, in terms of can it be handled through a more informal way versus to go for full investigation. That decision is made. And if it goes for a full investigation, it's disciplinary, there may be charges laid. It goes to a Professional Standards Bureau. But the stats and the tracking still are kept in the Human Resources section. If there's a gray area there and they're not sure, the two entities meet and they make a decision based on past practices and experience, and they have a discussion as who's going to handle it. Is it a WDHP complaint that can be resolved, or is this clearly something that violates a code of discipline that maybe they need to be demoted or potentially seek their job or a criminal charge of some sort? But as I said, the narrow part of the hourglass becomes still our Human Resources section within our Career Development Bureau. And so that's always the go-to place.
Okay, Ms. Moran, thank you. I'm sorry, 5 minutes, it does seem to go very quickly at this point. Commissioner Lewis, thank you so much for your answers. I think you've been very helpful, a real example when it's nice to see very positive things coming out of something as important as the Ontario Provincial Police.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you
Chair.
very much
Thank
for
you
your
to the
coming,
committee.
and the meeting is over for today. Thank you all.